Good to see you all here. E mihi atu nei kei te mana whenua, nai tahu, Ngāti Māmoe Waitaha. It's a pleasure to welcome you all here to the ASB Great Debate in Queenstown. Now, before I begin, I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori. Now, today is of particular significance because at 12 p.m. of this day in 1972, the Māori language petition was handed over to Parliament, an important milestone of the revitalisation of Te Reo Māori. We've come a long way since then, but there's still work to do, and so today we celebrate what we have achieved while we recognise the path that lies ahead. Te tero, whakamuri, kai ngā tahi, ātianga, whakamua. Right. So earlier this year, a group of mayors across Aotearoa, New Zealand, started a conversation looking for ways to facilitate more informed debate, participation, and perhaps more importantly, voting amongst our communities. This is something of significant importance to us all at both local and central government levels. Because ultimately, to exercise your democratic right to vote, it's essential that you have as much information as possible so you can make an informed decision. So over the last couple of weeks, New Plymouth Mayor Neil Holdham facilitated a debate on energy, while Mayor Moko Tapanya of the Far North hosted a conversation at Te Wharirunanga on party policies in regard to Te Reo Māori. So here in Queenstown Lakes District, the Queenstown Business Chamber of Commerce, in partnership with ASB, has been hosting these financial debates and 11. So we thank ASB and the Chamber of Commerce for sticking. Effort of mayors, I also want to acknowledge the hard work that goes into organising these events. And I just want to make special mention to Angela and Sharon of the Queenstown business team. It's been an enormous amount of work to coordinate all the moving parts to make an event like this a success. So hats off to you. I just want to acknowledge also the sponsors of TVNZ and also ASB, and which we'll hear from Victoria next. Now, there's some great questions we're putting to the panel tonight. We've had input from some of the top strategic thinkers in the district, and I'd like to think in the country. And I hope they lead to some good discussions. We have a great host and moderator in Jack Tame, who I know will ensure we don't get vague answers. I don't want vague answers, Jack. And I'm glad he's here to oversee the proceedings. I also want to personally thank the panel for joining us tonight. We have an engaged and diverse community who are looking forward to hearing from you, and we look forward to tangible commitments of what your party will deliver if successful next month. While this is a live stream debate for the nation to watch, I personally hope to hear more of the issues that this district is facing. Like many areas in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we have a growing infrastructure need. They require funding and a strategic approach at both central and local level. Here in Queenstown, we do not have the luxury of a ratepayer base as large as the cities, the likes of Auckland, Tauranga or Hamilton. Our demand projections estimate a resident population for our district at the moment at 52,000, drawing rates from just only 24,300. Meanwhile, we have just under 20,000 visitors on an average day. And then on a peak day, we're hosting 62,769. We desperately need infrastructure to support that pressure, and that comes with that. Our district is the poster child of Aotearoa, New Zealand, with our visitors representing 9% of the nation's visitor economy, which makes up 2.8% of the total national economy. Without a mechanism to levy visitors, we're struggling to keep up with providing infrastructure and services for the growth that continues to trend upwards. These factors have contributed to Queenstown Lakes being one of the most expensive places in the country to buy or rent a house, and has also raised a growing question over whether tourism is the benefit of the social well-being of our local communities. This is not new news. This is a message we have been sharing for a long time, and one that all of our panellists should be acutely aware of. I look forward to hearing more on how they will be investing to support our nation's needs to ensure we grow well. So, without further ado, I will hand over. I wish everyone an enjoyable and informative evening, and I look forward to what I'm sure will be a healthy and engaging debate. Let the fur fly. And just before we turn our minds to the weekend, bonsoir, up the waz, por Marie.
Honestly, Glenn could be hosting this thing. He sent me literally like 30 questions. How long is the event again? As we mentioned, this event would not be going ahead if not for the support of the team at ASB. So will you please join me in welcoming the CEO of ASB, Victoria Short.
Well, kia ora, and ina iwi ina mana, tēnā koutou katoa. Thanks to Mayor Glenn and also to Jack for hosting us here this evening. Ko Victoria Short, ASB CEO. Look, we've been sponsoring this event now for 5 election cycles in partnership actually with the Queenstown Council, because we fundamentally believe in the value of democracy and an open, candid and robust debate on the policies that are going to impact us all and shape the future of our country. Where we understand from talking with a lot of our customers, whether that's households, whether that's businesses, that it's a very challenging environment right now. We also understand that there's some real opportunities to get after, and we need to do that collectively. So tonight I'm really looking forward to the debate on the important topics, the ones that are going to shape our future, and particularly partnering with whoever is elected to really bring that to reality. So with that, I want to absolutely thank the panellists who we're going to be having up here tonight. It's a pretty brutal campaign, and I particularly want to thank those who are in the audience who are here to be part of that debate and challenge some of the thinking that we're going to hear tonight. So thank you very much. And Jack, the floor is yours.
So for all the bluster, for all the grand promises, the finance portfolio is the portfolio where we get to see a government's priorities and vision in concrete terms. It is the portfolio through which governing parties put our money where their mouths are. The qualification requirements for tonight's debate are the top 4 polling parties, and this is how it's going to work. I'm going to smash through a few topics. We're going to start with the big picture stuff, the state of the economy and tax. This is a unique, special part of New Zealand, and just because I don't want to have Glenn on my wrong side, I do have some Queenstown-specific questions prepared. We also wanted to invite questions from the audience, but we didn't want to have one of those situations where everyone was standing up and giving their PhD thesis. So what we've done is we've taken those questions and I've kind of sprinkled them throughout the different subjects that we'll be discussing this evening. One final message for everyone here and for the people who will be appearing before us on stage. This isn't the library. You are welcome to make a bit of noise. But my advice to you, having done a few of these things over the years, is read the room. If you make a dick of yourself, that's on you. So, will you please meet the first of our panellists here this evening, Labour's finance spokesperson, Grant Robertson. Next up, the finance spokesperson for the opposition. Please welcome National's finance spokesperson, Nicola Willis. Please welcome ACT leader David Seymour. And Green Party co-leader James Shaw. Now, just so everyone gets warmed up, we will start off with a nice little softball. So you each get 90 seconds. This is the only one that we're going to time this evening. You each get 90 seconds to answer this. Why is your party best suited to lead New Zealand in this economy? Grant Robertson, the floor is yours.
Well, kia ora koutou katoa. Over the last few years, New Zealand's faced a lot of challenges with the COVID pandemic, the inflation spike, and the cost of living pressures that households have faced. We've got through that by working together, by looking after each other and taking a balanced and pragmatic approach. And we've actually done okay. Along with how we've got through the COVID pandemic, we've got an economy that's 7% bigger than it was before COVID. We've got unemployment at 3.6%, 24 months of unemployment under 4%, only the second time since we started taking those records that that's happened. We've got public debt that's among the lowest in the developed world, and we've got an economy that can create good, high-paying jobs that have low emissions and keep New Zealanders here for the long term. If we want to look backwards, if we want to look back to a time when we think we worked together but we didn't, you can take that path. But if you want to take a path of progress, if you want to take a path where we do grow those jobs, we base it on making sure we sell ourselves properly in the world as smart and green, that we invest in our infrastructure as we have with $77 billion of that coming forward in the next 4 years, then that's what Labour will be delivering. We'll also be making sure that we get the balance right. We'll fully cost everything that we do, and we'll make sure that at the end of the day, every New Zealander is given the chance to succeed as they have done over previous generations. This is a great country. No one should be talking it down. The opportunity is there if you continue with a Labour government.
Thank you, Grant Robertson. Nicola Willis, why is your party best suited to lead New Zealand in this economy?
Okay isn't good enough. This is actually the best country in the world. But these past 6 years, Labour has mismanaged our economy, and it is hurting New Zealanders. Inflation remains out of control. We are entering the 3rd year of a cost of living crisis. Interest rates have more than doubled in just 2 years, meaning mortgages have become unaffordable for too many. Our current account deficit is the worst in the world. The forecasts for growth are worse than just about every other country in the world, with even Treasury confirming we're flatlining. It is time for a government that will focus on growing this economy, on repairing this economy, on reducing the cost of living, lifting incomes for all, and taking the sensible spending decisions needed to ensure public services can be preserved into the future. I want you to think about 2 numbers. In 2019, New Zealand's debt level was $5.4 billion. Today, as I stand here, it is $74 billion, projected to reach $100. Ask yourself, what do we have to show for all of Labour's wasteful spending? We do not have enough to show for it. So, National will stop wasteful spending, put the books in order, we'll reward work with good tax policy, and many more things I look forward to talking to you about tonight in beautiful Queenstown.
See, the thing is that everyone thinks this is the easy part for the politicians because they just get to speak freely for 90 seconds, but actually it's super difficult because they've all got to bite their tongues the whole time. David Seymour, why is your party best suited to lead New Zealand in this economy?
Look, the next government needs acts because New Zealand needs more than and it needs real change. And I'll give you one example. For the last 6 years, government has been doing less and less with more and more, while households and businesses are forced to do more with less to take up the slack and make up the difference. Over the last 6 years, the amount of spending per person has gone up 30% over and above inflation. But do we have more kids at school? No. Are they learning more? No. Are the streets safer? No. Are the roads and transport systems better? No. Do we have GPs that are easier to get into or more operations occurring into our hospitals? No, we don't have any of those things. And that's why the next government is going to have some honesty about what this country can afford and how it is going to deliver better results. The alternative is a long, slow slip, not catastrophic, but a gradual decline in living standards as New Zealand becomes a kind of middle-income country that's nice to visit, but not reaching the potential of a first-world country and an island paradise that we all aspire to. If we're prepared to make the choices, cut the government waste, cut the red tape and regulation, and finally say that business is a force for good and success is something that we welcome, then our country can be the greatest little country on earth. But it's going to take more than saying, let's just keep on going in the same direction, but show up in a blue tie on Monday. You need real change.
And James Shaw, why is your party best suited to lead New Zealand in this economy?
O tēnā koutou katoa, ngamihi nui kia koutou. Good evening, Queenstown. Look, this might seem counterintuitive, but the climate crisis actually represents the single greatest opportunity in at least a generation for us to build a highly productive, clean tech, high-value economy that works for everyone. Thank you for having me back at the ASB Great Debate here in one of the most beautiful parts of the most beautiful country. Over the course of the last 30 or 40 years, our country has woefully underinvested in pretty much every category of infrastructure that you can think of. Housing, water, energy, transport, you name it. The silver lining is, though, that we now have an opportunity to invest in a whole new generation of infrastructure that is more resilient, cleaner, and offers a better quality of life for everyone. Now, we know, of course, that many families are currently struggling with costs for their rent or mortgage, fuel, and energy costs. The renewable energy revolution, which you are pioneering here in this part of the world, offers us an opportunity to cut household bills and to eliminate our balance of payments deficit and to cut pollution, all at the same time. Now is not the time for incremental half measures that don't actually solve the problem. People are sick and tired of the status quo. Now is the time to be bold. And so at this election, we are asking you to give your party vote to the Green Party.
Right. Gloves off. Grant Robertson, you have delivered 6 budgets. At each budget, you set an allowance for the next year's budget's discretionary spending. How many times in the last 6 years have you met or gone under your previous spending commitments?
I think probably the answer to that is either 1 or 2. But Jack, the reason you have a budget allowance is to be able to plan to achieve your bigger economic goals. And through that period of time, we've kept New Zealand's level of debt proportionate to the rest of the world among the lowest. We've been able through that time to get the country through COVID. And I hear a lot of professors of hindsight economics up on the stage here who seem to think that we didn't go through COVID. We did. And most parties said at that time, let's make sure we look after people. We also, Jack, in that period of time, have to respond to events like the cyclone and the weather events. So our track record is that we've got an economy now that's 7% bigger than it was before COVID. All those stats that I said before, and the ratings agencies coming in and saying, you're doing a good job. We have to respond to the events that are in front of us, and that's what happens with allowances. I can ask this question, because Nicola's been throwing this at me throughout the last few debates. Did Bill English or Stephen Joyce ever do what Jack's just asked? Did they ever say that allowances would be something and then put more allowances in?
They got to surplus, Grant. You've
No,
delayed it 3 times.
3 times. They did it 3 times, Nicola. And every time you raise whether or not it's good economic management to keep to your budget allowances, you're saying that Bill English and Stephen Joyce weren't good economic managers.
So,
governments respond to the problems that are in front of them, and we've come through this COVID crisis as well as any other country.
we had the Prefu data set released earlier this week. Why, if you have consistently exceeded those allowances, why would the next 3 years be any different?
Because we cut our cloth for the circumstances that we're in. And the circumstances we're now in is that we're through the COVID emergency, and now is the time to bring spending back down to those more normal levels. You saw what we did in the last few weeks. We took $4 billion worth of spending out. That's the direction we're now on. Now, it is going to mean tight budgets. It's going to need a balance and to be careful. But we respond to the circumstances that are in front of us, and right now is a time to be able to bring that spending back down after the big investments through COVID.
If that's the case, why does spending not get under 30% for the entire forecast period? Remember this guy? He was the one who promised that spending should be less than 30% of GDP. I put out a 30-page document, Grant, and do you know what it's got at the heart of it?
We'll get on to that in a moment.
New Zealand is getting to keep more of their own money because they're sick of the way you spend it.
Okay, Nicola, so we are waiting on National to release its full alternative budget or full costings. You have talked about making greater cuts than the cuts that Grant has already identified. When will we get some specificity about exactly what that's going to mean?
We have been clear that we don't think it's okay that spending has increased 80% under Labour, but New Zealanders have not seen an 80% improvement in results in just about any area except for perhaps the number of ram raids occurring. So, what we're going to do is we're going to cut the waste, we're going to reduce the backroom bureaucracy, and we're going to focus
what does that
funding
mean, though?
on the front line. Well, it means, for example, that I will not be a finance minister that will sit back and watch while the Ministry for Pacific Peoples goes from a $7.5 million budget to a $43 million budget within a 6-year period. Because I have to ask, can we be sure that every one of those dollars has been used appropriately?
So what would be the budget for that ministry next year, provided David doesn't have anything to do with it?
We will...
Well,
we will ask...
It's a much easier answer, isn't it?
I
We will
guess
ask-
Nicola might have to increase their security budget.
We will ask the Ministry for Pacific Peoples, alongside the Department of Conservation, the Ministry of Social Development, to find 6.5% of savings. And as I look into this room, I see business owners, I see households who, I tell you, over the past couple of years have made more than 6.5% of savings. So why is it that government departments are the only ones that haven't been expected to tighten their belts?
Nicola, you've left out the thing that you haven't been able to tell. You haven't been able to tell New Zealanders is that a huge chunk of what you are proposing is based on a tax on foreign buyers that today 3 economists...
We'll get into that. We'll get into that. No. We'll get into that. No, we'll get into it.
Don't add up, do they, Nicola?
We'll get into that. We will get into that. You can trust me to ask about that, can you not?
Of course.
I do want to talk about your policies to try and ease the cost of living crisis. So, Grant, it's a month since you released your GST-free policy, the centrepiece, arguably, of your policies on the cost of living crisis. It is a policy that you yourself rubbished as recently as last year. It disproportionately benefits people on higher incomes. You're yet to explain how a groceries commissioner can be expected to monitor the pricing for something as seasonally and regionally variable as fruit and veggies. There isn't a single tax expert or economist who's come out publicly who thinks it's a good idea. Has your party sacrificed any claim to economic credibility to try and win an election?
No, I mean, and obviously,
Oh, this will be good.
The standards of economic credibility. Well, David, I could take your completely unbiased view of the world, or I could look at Standard & Poor's, Moody's, Fitch, who come into New Zealand and say...
No, we're asking about
have economic
GST.
credibility. But
GST.
I'll
want to
answer
talk
your
about
question.
that.
You raised economic credibility at the end. It's one of a component of cost of living measures, so that's the first thing. It's not the only thing.
It's the centrepiece.
It's one of a component. I would argue, actually, that reducing the cost of early childhood education, making public transport free for kids and half price for younger people, reducing the costs of prescriptions at the pharmacy, increasing working for families, all of those things are important cost of living measures. This is one thing we can do to address the thing that gets raised often with us as politicians, and that's the price of food. I acknowledge it's not the be-all and end-all, Jack, but it's doable, it's done in other parts of the world, and we can do it here.
Nicola, you say your standalone tax package adds up, but economists from across the political spectrum, including today Michael Riddell, cannot see a way for you to credibly sell $20 billion of property, $20 billion of property, to foreign buyers in the next 4 years. You've had 2 weeks now to publish your numbers and your legal advice, and you steadfastly refuse to do so. How can you possibly make any claim to economic credibility when you haven't yet proved how to fill what could be a multi-billion-dollar revenue hole in your top-line tax policy?
Well, first of all, we have published our methodology and our approach. It's on pages 18 and 19 of our tax policy. We've also released the legal advice. But I'll tell you about economists. You get 6 of them in a room, there'll be 7 different opinions. And look, I respect the fact that economists have different opinions, but I stand by our costings, because what they require is for us to sell less than half as many homes as sold to foreigners before the foreign buyer ban was placed on. That's actually pretty conservative. And when we look
Were
at...
foreign buyers, before the ban was lifted, were they only buying homes worth more than $2 million?
No, that's why we haven't got the number as big as it was before the ban went on. That's why it's less than half the size as it was. The other assumption that those economists have made, which I just reject, is that they don't think that many foreigners will want to buy homes more, and they don't estimate that they'll be buying homes at the top end of the market. Well, I've spoken to real estate agents who are in this room who have told me that there is huge demand from people who want to buy expensive luxury homes in New Zealand, and they're going to come back and I'm going to tax them, and I'm going to use that to ensure New Zealanders, the squeezed middle, working people, get to keep more of what they earn. And that is a priority for National. It may not be a priority for Labor, but it is for us.
Not a single calculation on that page. Not a single calculation on that page that you pointed to. Show us the details. If you're so confident...
Yeah, show us the details.
Hey, look,
No, seriously, let's do this.
If you're so confident, where are the actual costings?
Here we go.
No, it's a question.
I'm going to
Release
answer it
the
when you let me
costings.
have a turn. You've had your turn. It's my turn now. So, here's how it goes. We go back to before the ban. We look at the houses that used to sell. Then we say, okay, which areas of the country did they sell? Guess what? A lot of them in high-value areas of the country. Then we project forward and we say, how many do we think will sell across that distribution when we put a tax on? And we say, well, it won't be as many. Some people will be put off by the tax, but equally, we think there'll be a lot of high-value homes, noting there's more than 97,000 homes in New Zealand worth more than $2 million. And we then project, well, we think we'll sell between 1,600 and 1,700 at an average price of $2.9 million. This is an economics lecture. It's boring. We can keep talking about methodology.
But it's important.
But I just want to ask an important question too, Jack, because I want to ask Grant about the hole that he has created.
No, sorry, we're sticking on the other. No. We'll come back. We'll come back to. No. We'll come back to. This is central to credibility. Why won't you, if you're so confident in this methodology, we're looking all around the country,
I've just released the
give us the numbers. Give us the numbers. You have not released the numbers.
Yes, I have. I just said to you.
No, you haven't.
16 to 1,700.
It's not there. It's not there.
Okay. David, do you think National's tax policy as it stands is credible?
Well, I'm just astonished we're in a debate where the National Party is now arguing that they will tax more and Labor is saying that they won't tax more. This applause doesn't come off my time, does it? Okay.
Answer my question, though. Answer my question.
And here's the thing. I agree with Nicola when she said this government doesn't have a tax problem. It has a spending problem. And that is the real problem that New Zealand has, is that this government is spending far too much money. And we're going to have to be honest. And it's not always popular to be honest. And you won't always agree with me. But let me give you one example. We're spending $400 million a year on fees free. Now, these guys said it would be for 3 years. Even they didn't want to follow it through. We've spent $2 billion on fees free. That's now borrowed money because every dollar at the margin is borrowed. Now, if it got more disadvantaged kids to school, if it got more kids, and I mean school in the sense of tertiary, if it got more kids to school, tertiary at all, then I might be in favour of it. But the truth is, we've spent $2 billion of borrowed money for no better outcomes in tertiary education. Now, when you see that evidence, you've got a choice. You can blithely keep going and say, oh, well, let's hope that we can borrow a few billion more, as Fred Dagg used to say, or you can actually be honest and stop it, and we're going to need that sort of honesty.
Okay, I'm going to ask you about that in a second. Yep, I'm going to ask you about that in a second. That didn't come close to addressing the question I asked you. Is National's tax policy as it stands credible?
I don't think it matters. Because
It does matter. No.
It doesn't matter because David's tax policy would be the one that they actually end up implementing. That's right, isn't it, David?
Let me ask this. Are their revenue projections credible, in your opinion?
Look, I haven't seen their working, and I'm not.
Oh,
I'm not here
David.
I'm not here to bag Nicola. That's Grant's job. Although I have to say, if he doesn't improve, I might join him.
Okay.
My answer, Jack, is the real one, is that spending is the issue. Introducing new taxes is not the path to prosperity for New Zealand. If this was a country that was just short of taxes and we needed a few more taxes, I think we'd be there by now.
But
We've got enough taxes.
tax cuts and tax cut policy is critical. So ACT is reconsidering its tax plan in light of the pre-fu numbers.
Here we are.
I understand that it is ultimately a decision for your caucus, but what is your position as leader? Do you think tax cuts can be justified in this economic environment?
Well, my position is we're actually going through the numbers because, see, I thought that Grant was running away with the books, but the pre-fu is showing he's run away. Even I didn't think Grant could run that fast away with the book, but that's what he's done. And so we're looking at the numbers again, and we are looking at the numbers, and we will put out our new alternative budget with the benefit of the new numbers on Tuesday, because people deserve that honesty. They deserve to know what is possible and what can be done, and we will present that on Tuesday.
All right, James, the Greens are proposing a wealth tax, which the Prime Minister has emphatically...
Home crowd, James.
Which the
Can
you know what? I had a question, but sell them. Give them the sell on the wealth tax.
Well, in answer to the previous question, no, I don't think that National's numbers add up. And I frankly don't think a lot of people care. They just want a tax cut. Now, one of the great ironies of this is not only is National proposing more taxes than Labor, but the Green Party is actually proposing more income tax cuts than the National Party at this election. And the reason that we are able to do that is because we do want to ask those people who are doing particularly well in this country to chip in a bit more to ensure that everybody can get ahead.
What percentage of people is that?
So the detail of that is that everybody who's earning $125,000 or less would see their income taxes go down because the first $10,000 of your income would be tax-free. And yes, there would be an asset tax which would be levied on assets over $2 million if you're an individual or over $4 million if you're a couple.
So what percentage of New Zealanders would be affected by that?
It's about 2.5%.
Can you see the jealousy
and
on
so,
Grant's face right now? This is the policy he spent 6 months working on, and then Chris Hipkins rejected it.
It actually isn't, Nicola, but again, the reason we were working on it was to get the costings right. Something you might want to take on.
And then what happened next, Grant? And then what
Let me ask
next?
this, James. One more question, James. Given the Greens' record alongside Labor over the last 6 years, and given the Prime Minister has emphatically ruled out a wealth tax, why should anyone think the Greens will be any more influential in a potential future government than they have been already?
Because we weren't in Cabinet in the course of the last government. And what we are saying to people is actually, I don't think that other political party leaders actually have the right to rule anything in or out, or any other party in or out, or anything like that, because ultimately the voters have yet to decide what the makeup of the next government is. And over the course of the last 2 terms, I've been in 2 different configurations of government. I was outside Cabinet in both of those. I was an Associate Finance Minister in the first term. But ultimately, if you're inside Cabinet, that's where you get to have a say over the budget settings. And so, we are on course for, possibly the largest Green caucus that we've ever had, which would be delightful. But we are asking for more Green ministers sitting around the Cabinet table because that's where change actually happens.
Right. Would any party represented here on stage, if in charge of the books, would any party claim that they will bring down inflation faster than ACT?
Bring down. Well, what's he saying?
Inflation. Inflation's at 6. Well, if there are two levers for inflation: monetary and fiscal policy. The monetary policy, well, you can't do much about that. The fiscal policy, you can do something about that. Well, you can. We'll get to the RNZ in a second.
I mean, we could send Adrian Orr a note that says, here are your specific targets.
He's got one of those,
No.
David.
It says,
But
get
you
it down in the
changed it.
medium term. Now, I asked Jacinda Ardern in Parliament what the medium term was, and she didn't know.
You
If
should
she
ask
doesn't
Bill
know,
English because he brought it in.
well, he's not always right, sir. I'm sorry to tell you. You know, I know this is Southland, but he's not always right. And, you know, the fact is that monetary policy has been loose, and it has been used to support government expenditure. In fact, they've admitted that they brought down the government's interest rate throughout COVID deliberately in their own papers. We are now paying for that in inflation because there is no such thing as a free lunch. And one thing the next government has to do is make sure that the Reserve Bank has one target, and that's inflation. They can't do inflation and employment because you can't pull one lever in two directions at the same time. And then we've got to give them a policy targets agreement that actually tells them they need to get inflation under control within a time frame. Then you can start talking about fiscal policy.
Yeah, let's talk about. No, I want to talk about the. I'll come back to you again. I want to talk about the dual mandate. Explain to us how having a dual mandate, so keeping inflation between 1% and 3%, and ensuring maximum sustainable employment. Tell me how that is not like asking someone to eat ice cream at every meal and lose weight.
You're a bad person to ask that question, Jack. But actually, it's done all around the world. I mean, the US Federal Reserve is exactly the same mandate. The Bank of England have to take it into account, so do Australia. It's about a balance.
Lots
and
of
it's
countries
about...
have stupid policies. We don't need to copy all of them.
It's about making sure that you've got a balance between two extremely important parts of what makes an economy work. Yes, keeping inflation low, but also supporting people to stay and work. And the Reserve Bank is perfectly capable, as the Federal Reserve is, of making that balance work in our economy. And you know, I don't understand why, if it can be done anywhere else, it can't be done here. It can, and the bank has focused on bringing inflation down, and it will be down under the 1% to 3% band next year.
Jack, can I weigh in on this?
Yeah, both of you can.
Yeah, so look, I was one of my jobs as the COVID crisis hit was to ring up some of the leading business people in this country, some of the wealthiest people in this country, and get yelled at. And one of my abiding memories of that time was one of our leading business people and international investors saying, your first duty is to keep your people alive. This is going to be incredibly messy. We've just got to keep people alive, and then we'll clean up the mess later. We're now in the clean up the mess later phase of the COVID crisis, right? So it is no surprise that we are, I mean, frankly, there was a massive injection of capital into the economy, and there was actually some bad information around at the time as well. But we did what we had to do in order to keep people alive and to keep them attached to their work and with an income. You could have said, no, actually, we're not going to do that. We'll do what some other countries did and allow, 20,000 people to die and hundreds of thousands of people to be displaced from work and income. And then you'd have another mess that you've got to clean up. So there is a mess that we have to clean up. Now, inflation is a function of there being too much money for the, essentially for the supply pressures that are available now at the moment. And so ultimately, that has to be dealt with. But there are things that you can do on the monetary side and on the fiscal side, but there are also things that you can do on the supply side. And one of them, if I may return to a theme, is to switch to renewable energy. Solar power is the cheapest form of energy ever created by the human race. It's why when the United States brought in...
So you don't need to subsidise it. Great.
Yes,
so back to monetary policy.
Hang on. You want to let me finish? You got to let me finish, David, because I've given you plenty of time.
Come on.
Here tonight,
yeah.
And I think the people of New Zealand deserve better than that. So it is the cheapest form of energy ever created. So the more of it you do, the more money you have available to spend on other things, right? It is actually anti-inflationary. It's why the US called it the Anti-Inflation Act, is to try and ensure that we do that. So I think there are things that we can do that would reduce household costs, that would reduce inflation, that would change our balance of payments deficit, whilst we're getting through this mess.
Nicola, back to...
The problem is the period during which Grant changed the mandate from what had been the conventional, accepted wisdom of the successive governments, and he took away that focus on inflation, is also the period in which we have had almost more than 2 years of out-of-control inflation, still at 6%. And it's the period in which the Reserve Bank not only printed more money than many other countries in the world, pumped it out like there was no tomorrow, there is tomorrow now, but did that at the same time as the government was borrowing and spending more money than just about any other developed country in the world did. You guys printed too much money, you spent too much money, and New Zealanders are still paying the price with very high inflation
So, Nicola,
and a cost of living crisis.
In October 2021, when the Reserve Bank began to increase the OCR, about 2 weeks after that, Christopher Luxon proposed a massive package of spending in response to COVID. We did invest to get New Zealanders through COVID. We did invest to save people's lives and to save people's businesses. And yes, it costs some money. Just as the infrastructure that Glenn wants built here will cost money. Governments need to do that. We do it in a balanced and responsible way, and we look after people. The recipes I'm hearing up here are all in hindsight. Take yourself back to March 2020. I think New Zealand did pretty well, and actually the rest of the world thinks New Zealand did pretty well.
Okay, David. Relative to other parties, ACT is proposing significant cuts in government spending. Talk to us about the human cost of what you are proposing.
The human cost of what we're proposing is that people are going to have less debt for future generations, less inflation for people today, and less tax for people who are trying to make an honest buck and get ahead. You want to talk about costs, but actually the ACT Party is not proposing to cut a single line item of frontline expenditure, not one cop, or not one nurse, not one doctor. They all stay. What does change, I'll give you one example, the Ministry for Business Innovation and Employment. They've gone from 3,500 to nearly 6,000 FTEs in the last 6 years. Now, for a two-thirds increase in people, how often do you talk to business people who say, you know what, I'm so glad MB's nearly doubled in size because it's so much easier to do business now. In fact, actually, Jack, it works in reverse because once they're there, they spend their time creating more hoops for you to jump through, even tighter and even higher. And we think of ourselves as a country with a Kiwi can-do attitude, number 8 wire, Ernest Rutherford, who had to think because he had no money and all the rest. But you know what? The truth is, we spend most of our time terrified of work safety.
So how many jobs? How many jobs? If it's up to you, in the Wellington bureaucracy, how many people lose their jobs? That's the human cost.
We've laid that out in our fully costed alternative budget. We would go from 62,000 FTEs down to, I'm glad you've got some reason, from 62,000.
I like fiction, David, it's good.
From 62, no, it's the future, it's sci-fi, it's the future,
it's
mate.
definitely sci-fi,
It's the future.
Fantasy, possibly.
How many jobs?
And sometimes life imitates art, so you better look out.
How many jobs?
So we have 62,000 FTEs in the core public service. We'd take it down to 47,000. That's the same number we had in 2017, where this country had a perfectly functioning government.
So to be clear, you are going to make 15,000 people redundant immediately.
Well, obviously, there's going to be a few things you've got to work through. You've got to work
but essentially, you are
if
you are in charge,
possible, Jack, yes.
15,000 people.
Yes.
Jack,
Yes. And I tell you something, Jack, people think this will make the ACT Party unpopular in Wellington. We get a lot of people within the public service say, I'm voting ACT because I hope you fire that guy in the next cubicle.
So two things, Jack, because I also brought along ACT's alternative budget. Two things from that. I've enjoyed coming down to Queenstown over the last few years for the Winter Games, or Monica, which I opened with Glenn the other day. I've also been down here for the New Zealand Golf Open.
And the major events fund won't be there, and no one will come and play sport in New Zealand.
David, it goes under this.
No one will ever come and play sport or do a tournament in New Zealand.
This
is just an argument for a national-led government, because we'll make sure the games stay.
Okay, hang on.
Let's
just be clear about that. What happens to the major events fund?
It should be
David's budget.
Sports have been around longer than government.
But this community will not have those events. They won't have them. That's what they told us.
I don't believe it.
You ask Glenn, you ask John Hart, you ask the organisers of those events. FIFA Women's World Cup, fantastic event for New Zealand.
And it only happened because of a government subsidy.
Gone under David.
Okay.
Things that generate
Second point, Grant.
Second point, 50%. What's that? Well, that's not what we were told. That's not what we were told.
Second point, Grant.
I'm really pleased to hear it, but it's not what we're told. Second point,
Okay, is this one going to be shut down by the audience too?
Second point, David. You say in here that you're going to reverse 50% of the increase in the operating allowances since budget 2021.
But you've already
listen to
spent
me.
it, so that's why we're
Listen to
redoing
me.
our alternative
Listen to
budget
me.
now.
If you say you're going to do that, 79% of that funding in this budget was for cost pressures. That's the money that pays doctors, that's the money that pays nurses, that's the money that pays the police, that's the money that pays teachers. There is nothing costless. Now, David,
Okay.
costed this, but those are the costs.
Yeah, but I'm completely aware of that, Grant. But you see, that's why we're redoing it, because inflation has stayed higher for longer than you promised, and there has been more cost pressure. That's why we're redoing it.
And here's the
it's
thing.
actually because of your fiscal irresponsibility
No.
that we have to redo it.
Okay. You two just have a drink of water. Yes, Nicola.
Here's what you've failed to understand about cost pressures. You've met every dollar of cost pressure that government departments have asked you for, but what about taxpayers? What about families who are facing cost pressures? We're going to give them tax reduction because it's more important than funding more money for government departments to spend on task forces, farewell parties, and more consultants. Actually, government is about priorities. And you have consistently prioritised spending more the way you think is best, rather than giving tax relief to New Zealand.
All right. Okay, we're going to keep moving. James, I got one for you.
Hey.
As it stands, New Zealand is on the hook for billions of dollars in liabilities and offshore carbon credits if we are to meet our climate goals by 2030. Are those liabilities being adequately accounted for?
No, they're not, and this is a source of some frustration to me, actually, that Treasury has not booked that as a specific liability. And my priority is to ensure that that money is actually spent at home. And one of my frustrations, again, that Treasury haven't done that is, in the absence of that, we're unable to make those decisions to make those domestic investments.
Right. A question for each of the other parties then. Should Treasury be accounting for those climate offset liabilities?
Well, I'd take Treasury's advice on that. What I do think is very important is that the emissions trading scheme be allowed to work. And that means when polluters are asked to pay a price for pollution, they pay that price and the government doesn't turn around and cut them a cheque. Why are we cutting cheques to big polluters when New Zealanders need tax relief?
Can I answer that question?
Yeah.
Because climate change is actually quite a significant problem, and we need to deal with it. And so the investments that we've made,
So ask the polluters to decarbonise. Why do you need to pay?
James, you go.
Please give me the same courtesy. Is that those businesses would not have made those investments in the time that we have. I mean, if you look at New Zealand Steel and Fonterra, we are talking about 2 million tonnes of pollution that won't be going into the atmosphere every single year as a result of those investments. Now, I agree with you on this point. I do think the ETS does need to work. And actually, if one of the reforms that we want to introduce, if we get that through, means that we won't need to be writing those cheques because they'll actually be rewarded for making those things through the ETS itself, right? So they'll actually be getting that capitalisation of their decarbonisation through the ETS itself. So I kind of agree with you in principle. The ETS does need to work. The price needs to send that signal, but also businesses do need to be capitalised because at the moment the setting is you can get capitalised for planting trees, but you can't get capitalised for investing in new technology, and that is bonkers.
Should Treasury be accounting for those climate offset liabilities?
Yeah, the reason that Treasury haven't is because they don't believe there's enough certainty about what they'll be. But James and I have been having this discussion for 5 or 6 years. It inevitably has to happen. It's a question of how we can get it into the accounts in a way that they want. But I do just want to come back to the ETS question because the whole point of the ETS is it's polluter pays, and what we've done is then recycled that money directly into lowering emissions, including the fund that's assisting Fonterra and New Zealand Steel and others to reduce their emissions.
Are you keeping that fund just for climate action, Grant?
It's for climate action.
Are you keeping that fund just for climate action,
and
Grant?
adaptation.
Just for climate action and adaptation?
For things that help reduce emissions.
Not raiding that fund at all at the moment?
No, for things that help reduce emissions like public transport, Jeff. Yes.
Okay.
Where are we going?
Do you agree there, James?
Yeah. Well, there were some calls there that I didn't wholly agree with. But the thing that I'm really worried about at this election is that Nicola wants to defund the entire government work program on climate change, which is paid for by polluters, in order to fund her tax cuts alongside these non-existent houses. And so while I said, my sense is that people actually don't care that Nicola's numbers don't add up. They just want the tax cut. But it does worry me that government work program is going to get defunded, because we've made a lot of progress over the last few years, and that has taken 30 years just to get started.
Right, I've got to keep things moving because we're struggling with time here already, which was entirely predictable and my fault. A question for each of you. What is your party doing to foster a transition to a low-emissions, high-wage, high-skill economy? What is the good stuff you're doing to reshape our economy? Nicola, you go first.
Well, we want the emissions trading scheme to work. The current government has undermined it so badly that they got taken to court and actually lost in court. So we are going to back the emissions trading scheme with a climate dividend so that New Zealanders can see that they get a benefit from it. We're also going to cut the red tape that is stopping investment in renewable energy happening at the pace that it needs to. We are going to make targeted, cost-efficient investments that will help accelerate emission reduction. For example, we've already announced our plan to help roll out electric charging network across New Zealand to help people be able to make the transition to an electric car. We're also going to ensure we invest in adaptation, because even if we reduced all of our emissions, climate change is upon us, and we are going to have to invest in the infrastructure needed to make our communities more
To be specific, I'm interested in the shape of our economy in the future. How is our economy in the future going to be different from an economy that relies on 100,000 net migration and selling some milk powder to China? So what is your party going to do to foster a new low-emissions, higher-wage, high-skill economy?
Well, I am really proud of our farmers, because actually today they are the most carbon-efficient farmers in the world, and they feed 40 million people.
That's right.
So I'm going to keep backing them. And one of the ways we can back them is by removing the regulations which are stopping them being able to do the gene editing that could allow for a breakthrough solution to reducing agricultural emissions. That's the big prize. If New Zealand wins that prize, not only do our farmers get better prices for their products, but we can potentially resolve many of the emissions occurring around the world. But yes, at the same time, we should be pursuing other areas. We should be pursuing tech. We should be pursuing the space industry. We should be pursuing high-tech manufacturing. All of these things are available to us, but don't come after the primary industries.
Grant.
Yeah, and so from my perspective, there's 5 things. The first of those is that we've got to invest more in research, development and innovation. And in the last budget, we put $500 million in for 3 new research hubs there on top of the research and development tax credit that we've done. It is one of the key drivers of productivity, and we've got to do more of it. We've got to heavily invest in that infrastructure, $70-odd billion going in over the next 4 years into that. We've got to make sure we continue to get skills that we need into the country, both through immigration, but also through upskilling New Zealanders as well. And that's what we've done with apprenticeships and trade training as well. And then we do have to get into support the sectors. I actually agree with Nicola. Our agricultural sector is important. Let's invest in the technology. Let's invest in the sustainability side of it. Fund it out of the fund that Nicola wants to cut, I might say.
No,
and then finally,
that's not
I want to
true.
see us in those industries like gaming, game development, like the space industry, the aerospace industry and renewable energy, where we know there are high-paying jobs. We have a 5-point plan on that, and that will start to turn the dial on productivity.
David.
Yeah, well, with respect, I think your question's not quite right. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? It's not up to these people. It's not up to any political party. It's up to investors with savings. It's entrepreneurs with ideas. It's workers with time.
So what will you do to foster that?
How do we create the environment for those people to do it? Well, first of all, we've got to get real about our global links. This country is too small to put up walls to foreign direct investment the way that we do. It's too small to put up barriers to people bringing their skills. It's too small for the tall poppy syndrome that means we're opposed to anyone coming here, but especially if they're successful. We can't afford to keep holding the world out. We need an infusion of time and talent and ideas and money from outside as well as inside New Zealand. And when people get here, we've got to make sure that our regulatory environment actually welcomes and fosters people doing innovative things. The high-altitude legislation that allowed Rocket Lab is a perfect example of what can happen when you remove the regulatory barriers. Nicola's absolutely right about genetics. This country should be a superpower of agricultural genetics. We've got an educated population, a huge agricultural base, And yet, because we let the superstitious Looney Tunes set the agenda on genetic technology all through the 90s and early 2000s, we have gone nowhere, and talented people have to leave this country to do experiments outside the lab because we're that far behind. So what we're going to do, Jack, is get our global connections secure, make sure that our regulatory environment fosters innovation, and then we're going to do something else, which is make sure this country has the basic infrastructure, which I hope we get to talk more about, because at the moment we rely far too much on politicians picking winners. And if these guys knew which new technologies to invest in, they'd never have to fundraise for their political party ever again. But they don't.
James.
Look, when it comes to climate change, I have to say that the ACT Party are more deadly than serious. Everything that they want to do is to unwind all of the progress that we've made. They want to get rid of the Zero Carbon Act. They want to get rid of the Climate Change Commission. They want to drag our level of action right back to where it was 30 years ago. In Christchurch, there are a couple of companies that I'd like to talk about. One is Kia Aerospace, who are one of the new emerging aerospace companies putting up solar-powered stratospheric planes that can do Earth observation science, that can tell us about how our atmosphere is changing, and, for example, how additional biodiversity is helping to sequester more carbon. So that is one of the opportunities of the green economy. Aspiring Materials, also based out of Christchurch, who are looking at ways of chemically sequestering carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and storing it over geological time periods. The economic opportunities here are colossal. We need the investment. And I have to say I'm very proud of the work that we've done over the course of the last 6 years with Green Investment Finance. There's almost $500 million of deployed capital there, with a 1.6 to 1 ratio of private investment to public investment on that front. We've got to back innovation like those companies there, and we need that infrastructure that I was talking about at the beginning. And if you defund the entire government work program, none of that can happen.
Grant, net migration is at almost 100,000, a record level, despite all those Kiwis moving overseas. We are bringing in thousands of people with skills. We're also bringing in thousands of fast food cooks, lawn mowers, handymen. Migrant abuse is widespread and well documented. Explain to us how your immigration reset is fostering that new economy.
Yeah, well, every single business audience I've been in, Jack, for the last 3 years, the first question that gets asked is access to skilled labour. And we did have the borders closed during COVID, obviously. We've now opened those up, and there's been a significant amount.
You're very slow to do it.
A significant amount of pent-up demand that was needed. Actually, that wasn't what your party was saying at the time, Nicola.
I remember saying
we'll come to your party in a
nurses should be on
second.
the green list so we could staff our hospitals, actually. We spent months saying that, and you ignored us.
But we're not going to stay at that level. The Treasury is forecasting net migration to come down to 40,000 over the next few years. What I would say about the exploitation is that is never acceptable. And the scheme that we put in place was to make it more efficient for employers to be able to bring people in, to get rid of those who were good, reliable employers having to fill out the same form 3 or 4 times. Unfortunately, it's been exploited. Unfortunately, it's been exploited by some people, and we have to crack down on that. But that scheme has enabled us to fill the skill gaps we've got. It is not the be-all and end-all of how you deal with skill deficits. That is about training up New Zealanders. That is about making sure that we invest in our vocational education system and in our universities. But immigration will be part of our future. It always has been. And the system we put in place has definitely made it easier for employers.
Nicola, what would you do to change our immigration settings the first day you're in office?
Well, we will get rid of the requirement at the moment that means you can have a new immigrant getting paid much more than the New Zealander next to them, despite the fact they have the same skills and qualifications. But you highlighted a problem that's very real, and that's this. You talked about the fact that there are jobs being filled by people from overseas that surely New Zealanders could fill. And it's true. We have record job vacancies across the country, and yet there are 50,000 more people on a job seeker benefit today than when Labor came to office. So we've got to get serious about having incentives back in our welfare system that mean we support those who need a hand up, absolutely provide a safety net for them. But those who can work should. And our welfare system should send that
to be
message.
back to the immigration settings. So under the accredited employer work visa, to be 100% clear, you would remove that minimum wage requirement for migrants who are moving here to
We will
work.
keep a minimum wage requirement. We will remove the current requirement, which has put a median industry wage requirement in that means that immigrants are getting paid more than New Zealanders for the same work.
And we will go back to the system where immigration, which we need, drove wages down in our economy, and we'll have a low-wage economy again. I thought we were after a high-wage
That's not
economy.
true, Grant.
Well, it is.
That's
It's
fairy
exactly
tale
what
economics again.
Well, explain how you avoid that, though. If you have, I mean, this is bringing wages down
No, that's
from
not true,
employers'
because
perspective.
we would require employers to pay industry standard wages pegged
Isn't that the same
to
thing?
what New Zealanders are being paid, and only for immigrants to be used in areas where there are genuine skill shortages. It's really important that immigration policy is paired with welfare settings which ensure people are incentivised into work.
So as per your vision, is anyone here prepared to give me a number of what annualised net migration should be for each of the next 3 years?
It's not about a number, it's about...
Well, it is, it's hand in glove.
It's about the right people for the right job at the right time. It is. Setting a number would be completely artificial.
$1 million.
It would be completely artificial, Jack, to set a number, because the different skill gaps that we've got need to be filled. If we can't fill them in New Zealand, we use immigration. Setting a target number would actually cut off what you need.
Is anyone prepared to give a number?
No, look, I agree with Grant. It's not about a number, but we are terrible at ensuring that those people are able to put down roots and connect with their families and create communities. We're terrible at ensuring that they've got enough housing to live in, or transport links and so on and so forth. The number of people who are coming into this country this year is larger than the population of Palmerston North, which has a base hospital. We haven't built a base hospital this year. Or four high schools, or 50 or 60,000 houses for additional people. So, whilst, the really important thing is people come to this country, they make a huge contribution to this country, and, that contributes to economic growth and all the things that people kind of want and care about, and it fills skill gaps and all that kind of thing. But we have to match that with ensuring that they've got decent places to live, and that they're welcome and live here, and that we can welcome
and that we have the infrastructure that can handle them, which is a nice little segue. So let's work down the line here. How should New Zealand's infrastructure deficit is tens, if not hundreds, of billions of dollars. How should we address it, David?
Oh, it's hundreds, and it links to immigration, because if we don't get the infrastructure right, then people start to become very xenophobic as soon as immigration takes off, and then businesses get starved of workers, and we go through the whole cycle again. What do we need to do about infrastructure? Well, basically in New Zealand, the only way to pay for it is if the council or the Crown can afford it on its balance sheet. If they can't afford it, you just wait another generation, see if it gets built. Probably not. I mean, in Auckland, we've been waiting since 1959 for a second harbour crossing. The whole generation been and gone while we're waiting. What we need to do is set partnerships between the central government and each region, including here, and say this is the wish list, this is what we'd like to build out as infrastructure, and this is what the Crown and the Council can realistically afford. And then we should open up the book and say investors within New Zealand, it could be ACC, it could be iwi, it could be a super fund, and those outside, it could be the Canada Pension Plan, should have the opportunity to say, we will build this on the following terms, we'll toll it for this many years at this price, and if the local community votes for it to go ahead because they're sick of waiting generations for anything to happen, they should be allowed to do it. In short, we have only one way of funding and financing infrastructure in New Zealand. Overseas, they use many ways, and if we don't start doing that too, then we will find that our potential to bring more people here, to build more interesting businesses, to live a better life, to be safer on our roads, and do all of the things that we wish to do will just stagnate. And this is why we need fresh new ideas, and we need to do more than just keep doing the same thing with a blue tie. We actually need some real change in infrastructure, as with everything else.
Okay, I'll come to you in a moment, Grant. Not more of the same with a blue tie? How would things be different under a national government?
3 key changes. The first is we have to let private capital help us build infrastructure. The New Zealand Super Fund wants to invest in long-term infrastructure assets, and yet this government has failed to work with them to achieve that. We need to do better funding and financing tools, and we need to do regional and city deals that set out longer-term pathways for investment, and we need much faster consenting. I want to talk a bit about the city deals, because it's very important here in Queenstown. Because Queenstown has significant infrastructure needs that it is struggling to meet from its current rating base. We want to sit down with Queenstown and say, what should the next 10 years look like? What do you need to fund? What do we as central government need to help you with? Let's plan that out over a longer pipeline. We then want to say to the Queenstown Council, if you consent more homes in this area that so badly needs them, then we will pay you more. We have a Housing for Growth Fund. We'll pay you $25,000 for every house you consent above the historic average. And second, we recognise the Council's problem with not being able to meet the funding requirements for new developments. So we will help them to take borrowing off their balance sheet through special interest vehicles that will allow the actual beneficiaries of growth to pay for that growth rather than the existing rating base. We think seriously about infrastructure because the current situation isn't working. We have a severe infrastructure deficit that is holding back New Zealand's growth, it's holding back our productivity, and all this government has delivered is constant visualisations of Auckland light rail without a single metre laid.
Jack, I was going to say when David finished talking we needed to check the time because there was a moment where him and me were going to agree with each other and I thought we should note it for everybody for the future.
I agree with you about a lot of things, Robert, just not to do with finance.
But what we've been doing over the course of the last few years is developing up the way that we do exactly what Nicola's just talked about, special purpose vehicles. There's a piece of legislation called the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act. It does exactly what Nicola's talking about. We need to see more of it. We have an urban growth partnership with Queenstown. We need to give that real meat on its bones to make sure that we do get
It's
that
not working though,
right.
is it?
Hang on, I didn't interrupt you. We need to get that right across New Zealand because I totally agree. We as a country, as on behalf of taxpayers, the government does need to step up and invest in infrastructure. We didn't do that properly for decades. We've now got about $70 billion worth going in over the next 4 years. But David's right, that won't be enough. We have to work with iwi, we have to work with local council, we have to work with the private sector and crowd that funding in. And we are working with the Super Fund. In fact, they're doing a fantastic project on offshore wind right now off the Taranaki coast with Copenhagen infrastructure partners. We're already doing this, but the critical core element of it is a government fronting up with the infrastructure funding. We didn't see that the last time National were office, and we have seen it.
You can see the Waterview Tunnel, but you can't see Auckland Light Rail.
Okay, a question for each of you then, and this is of critical importance to this audience. Do you support a local visitor levy to support growth funding in Queenstown?
Thank you. Well, not specifically, but I have something similar that I think gets at the problem. You see, tourism generates a massive amount of revenue, especially through GST for central government. Our view is that fast-growing areas like Queenstown, like Hamilton, like Tauranga, like Auckland, in fact everywhere, should be getting a portion of the GST that central government collects on development in that area. I was talking to people at the council today. They said, you know what, that would mean about $80 million a year for Queenstown under ACT's policy because there's so much development going on. And the beautiful thing about it is how it changes council's incentives. You see, there's only one time a council actually comes to you and gives you fast service. That's when they're issuing a parking ticket. You know why? Because they get revenue for issuing you a piece of paper. And if we did the same thing with building consents, resource consents, if they got revenue in return for allowing development in their area, they'd have the incentive, but also the means to pay for that development. So that would be a very similar effect, although not specifically the same as a local visitor levy.
Yeah. So from
local visitor levy.
Yeah. So from our perspective, Jim Bolt's here. We did some work on this when Jim was the mayor. What we said was, let's hear what the local community wants. We're prepared to back what the local community wants. There is, and it's been mentioned already tonight, the problem of some court cases that have happened around the country on this exact proposal, which holds it up, but I'm certainly not against it in principle. What we also think we need to do is take a look at a more nationwide version, in a sense, which is the international visitor levy that we brought in that helps fund both tourism and conservation projects, and use that more widely to be able to actually develop some of the issues that are being faced here.
Does the local audience want a visitor levy? Do you want one? So provided it's pretty
We might do it just a little bit more scientific than that, Jack. But,
provided it's pretty legal then.
as I said, we're prepared to back it if that's what the local community wants. But I do put the caveat on that we saw what happened in Auckland. Phil Goff was trying to do this up there. It ended up in court. I actually think we've got to look at some other revenue sources as well and build the partnerships up.
Nicola, local visitor levy.
It's not our policy. We acknowledge the issue that is very felt in this area, and that's why we want to sit down and do a deal with Queenstown where we agree to fund some of the infrastructure that is needed to support a vital source of productive growth for New Zealand, which is tourism and the export dollars it brings in. We are a country in a current account deficit of huge proportions. We can't afford to turn our back on tourists, and that means we need to partner with Queenstown to invest in the infrastructure you need to support it.
Do you support a local visitor levy, James?
Yeah, I do. And I remember in the 2017 Great Debate, I got a round of applause when I said it was Green Party policy to bring in an international visitor levy, which we then did in government, right? And that has funded some projects around here as well. And the idea that you would have something localised, with the caveats and getting through all the legal issues that Grant talked about, yes, absolutely. I also agree that we do need to look at funding and financing of local government because, we have ended up in a situation where, over the course of several decades, successive governments have effectively had an abusive relationship with our local authorities and tried to run everything centrally and only done the projects that central government wanted to do. And I do think that we need to empower local government to be able to make those choices for themselves.
Okay.
A good example of that abusive relationship would be the housing accord that these guys all signed up.
Let's talk housing.
Just
Let's
2
talk
years
housing.
ago.
Okay, so despite the recent correction in house prices, relative to income, houses are more expensive, Grant, than when you took over. They were more expensive before the COVID surge. Rents are way up. I don't need to mention KiwiBuild, but KiwiBuild. What are you going to do to make housing, both renting and owning a house, more affordable?
One of the things that we have learned over the last little while is that the main driver of the increase in rents is lack of supply. So we have to keep building more and we have to keep building faster. So what we've done is created things like the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund that actually supports local government, supports housing developers to be able to put that basic infrastructure in so that we can build. It's why we've got the build to rent policy so that we're actually incentivising and encouraging people there. It is why we did get an accord and an agreement around medium density rules, which unfortunately others have walked away from, to enable councils to be able to do the kind of development that they need to do. We need to build more and we need to make sure that we've got the workforce that can enable us to do that. We've been able to do that through our immigration policy as well as the training that we've done.
Nicola, you will reintroduce interest deductibility and pull the Bright Line test back to 2 years, which makes houses more attractive as an investment vehicle. How will that impact house prices?
When Labor first thought up the landlord taxes, they were advised that if they imposed them, a probable happening would be that rents would go up. Since those taxes have been imposed, rents have gone up on average $80 a week. We have a State House waiting list today that is 4 times as large as it was when National left office, and last night hundreds of children were sleeping in emergency motel rooms. We need private landlords in this country to provide affordable housing, so we will remove those punitive taxes.
And so what will it do to house prices?
Well, I don't know what it will do to house prices.
You don't know?
Well, I don't think that the interest deductibility change is the key thing for house prices. I think the key thing for house prices...
You can see that it
Let
makes
me
it
answer
more
the
attractive.
question.
One thing it'll
It
do,
will do
Jack.
nothing to house prices.
I can tell you one thing it'll do, Jack, is that it will mean that first home buyers will go back to being about 15% of the market instead of about 25%.
No, I
Nicola
don't.
can
I
answer
disagree.
here, yeah.
I disagree, because the most important impact on house prices is how many houses we are building and supplying. And the constraint to that right now is not whether or not landlords can deduct interest. The constraint to that right now is zoning rules, infrastructure rules, building construction rules, red tape that is holding back the development of housing that we need. That's going to have a far more profound impact on housing affordability than those things. And I'll tell you what, when you take away landlord taxes, you reduce pressure on rents. And that is very important, because today's renters are tomorrow's first home buyers.
It's actually absolutely rubbish, because the key driver as you've all just said, is that rents go up when there's a lack of supply, right? That is the key driver. And what we've noticed is that regardless of the tax situation or anything else that happens, rents go up and they never come down. They only ever go up, no matter what the tax settings that you have. And that's in part because houses are the only risk-free investment category in this country, as guaranteed by several generations of finance ministers, including the ones who are hoping to be here. If you have to focus on supply, because rents only go down, as they are starting to in Auckland, when you get enough houses in the market available to be rented. And that is what puts downward pressure on rents.
Well, I totally agree with that, but in the meantime, can we stop the war on landlords? Landlords and tenants have a symbiotic relationship, and punishing landlords is the stupidest way of helping tenants ever invented in the history of public policy. We've got to stop doing it. As tenants, we actually want more people renting out houses. We want to make it easier to be a landlord, so there's more supply and more choice. Every time the government puts another rule or regulation on being a landlord,
is
people
it important
exit the
that
market.
homes are insulated, David?
Just today, Grant, it's funny you raise that, because I hear from people here in Queenstown that people are not renting out their houses. They're putting them on Airbnb because that doesn't require the healthy homes regulation.
So we should just flag it.
So
there.
you have
Okay.
actually, well, it's a very good example of how Grant Robertson, who I admire for having the best of intentions, manages to screw it up again and again by not understanding.
David, now you've ruined it.
Okay, Nicola, another question for you. So the average house price here in Queenstown is about $1.7 million.
Not quite enough for tax cuts.
Yeah, so, well, at the moment, right? So what will happen if you introduce a tax on foreign buyers at $2 million? What will that do to house prices in this region?
Well, the evidence from the past is that this will be a tiny fraction of the property transactions that occur in the market, and it will occur at the top end of the market. So we don't think.
But it's
that
the
it will affect
average house price.
prices in
Average
other
house price
parts
is
of the market.
$1.7 million.
But also, Nicola,
So-
if it's a tiny fraction of the houses, how are you going to raise enough revenue to pay for those tax cuts?
Because a tiny fraction of the market, is still hundreds of homes. Jack.
You said earlier on.
No,
Hang on, Jack.
Yeah.
You said earlier on tonight that it would be half of all sales would be above $2 million.
I did not say that.
It has to be.
You literally said half of all the houses sold will pay for those tax
No,
cuts.
I didn't say that. I said that there are more than 95,000 homes worth more than $2 million, and our policy only requires that we sell 1,600 to 1,700. I know the Greens struggle with numbers,
Every
but
single
don't
year.
misquote
Every
me.
year.
Every single year.
No, back to my question though. What's it going to do to house prices here? You say that they're mansions. The average house price in this district is $1.7 million. So if you put a tax on foreign buyers for house prices over $2 million, what's that going to do to house prices in
We
this
don't
region?
think it will affect them. Because
You don't
we're
think?
we're going to be asking them to pay a 15% tax, which will deter speculation. The
But
people who
it's
are-
going to incentivise anyone selling their house to make it $2 million instead of 1.7, so that they can have foreign buyers come into the market.
As I said, Jack, the most important thing we can do for housing affordability in Queenstown is get more houses built here. And the best way we can do that is to work with the council on the infrastructure issues and the land zoning issues that have held that back for too long. The second best thing we can do is we can work with the Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust, and I know Julie Scott is here tonight, to ensure that we're investing in more affordable housing, that we're doing rent to buy, that we're making sure that there are affordable options for workers in Queenstown. And we will capitalise the Queenstown Lakes Housing Trust to do that, because we don't think Kāinga Ora is always the answer.
Okay, a question here from the floor, a superb question. I refer you all to the front page of today's Mountain Scene. As it stands, an excellent periodical, as it stands, people living in areas classified as rural have limited access to the accommodation supplement. So here in Queenstown, as you've probably noticed, there has been significant growth of late. But much of what we consider Queenstown falls outside of the urban boundaries, meaning that people living in those parts of town can't get the full accommodation supplement. Now, I know a lot of work has gone into this. Breaking news today, as per the Mountain Scene, is that the New Zealand's Petitions Committee has recommended urgent progress from the next government in rezoning accommodation supplements across the country. So, this question from Tracy Roxburgh from the Mountain Scene. Woo! David, we'll start with you. If you are part of the next government, will you adopt the recommendations of the committee and commit to amending the accommodation supplement boundaries within your first year of government?
Yeah, it seems fair and I think it's the right thing to do.
Grant.
Yep, that's a cross-party committee, and I think sometimes you've just got to admit that the settings are wrong and they need to be changed.
Nicola.
We're going to make sure we look at that, and I want to congratulate Joseph Mooney, the local MP, who made sure that that petition saw the light of day.
You know that Glenn made me, he said to me, I can't let any sort of weaseling there. Are you definitely going to commit in your first year to rezoning those areas?
We will make sure that we rezone it appropriately, but also, this is important, and it's a difference. We're going to rezone it. We're going to make sure that it's fair, but we're going to make sure that it's a way that's fair and consistent across the country and sustainable into the future.
James.
Yeah, look, I think that we should stop the war on renters that we've had in this country for the last several generations. And actually, the accommodation supplement is one of the areas that has got completely bonkers rules, of which this is one.
Okay, we've only got a few minutes left. There is one giant subject that we haven't talked about that we should talk about, and that's tourism. I want to know from each of you, where does tourism sit in your priorities, and how should we be thinking about and striving towards a more sustainable, high-value tourism industry in the future? How should we be fostering it, David?
Well, again, I just go back. I think that the role of the government is to provide the infrastructure, set the rules of the game, let the entrepreneurs do that job. I don't think that having someone sitting in Wellington trying to guess what sort of experiences people offshore want, what sort of experiences people in New Zealand have the means and the desire to provide, I don't think they have the ability to do that. And if that kind of approach to economic management worked, then we probably would have lost the Cold War.
So we agree in part on that, which is that it can't be done by the government alone. It's why we set up the Tourism Industry Transformation Plan, which is driven by industry. It's got two parts to it. The first of those is around workforce, which is already underway as to how we can actually grow the workforce that we need. The second part of it is the Tourism Environmental Action Plan, which does drive us to a higher value of tourism. We want as many different types of people to come to New Zealand, but the bit that we need to do as government is get out there and market New Zealand as a high-value tourism destination. Our environmental credentials are absolutely critical to that, so we've developed that partnership up. It's one of those 5 things in our economic plan I mentioned before, is high-value, sustainable tourism done as a partnership.
Nicola.
The tourism sector still hasn't fully come back post-pandemic. It used to employ 220,000 people and bring in 17.7 billion in export revenue. We want to make sure that tourism continues to bring in export dollars. So that means ensuring that the tourism industry has access to the workers it needs, dealing with these infrastructure issues that we have been discussing tonight. Actually, the Department of Conservation has a role to play. We want to see longer-term concessions because we know that the current regulatory environment makes it quite hard for many of the people who are using the dock estate. And we also want to ensure that there is contestable funding for regional events which help promote tourism. So we back tourism in a big way. It's a good industry for New Zealand and it has a good future.
Why are you cutting conservation funding?
We're not.
You are. You're cutting backroom funding.
Yes, we'll cut the backroom funding.
Okay. Okay. James.
Well, just on this point, you know, the Department of Conservation has to manage 30% of the country's landmass on less than 1% of the government's budget, right, which is just not doable, frankly, and the reason why we've got out-of-control browsing pests in this country is because they're unable to, they don't have the funding to do their job. So, I mean, like a lot of people here, you know, we really strongly believe in the, you know, high-value, highly productive, high-wage tourism sector, moving towards more of a boutique industry than the kind of commodity mass tourism, which, in my experience around the world, tends to destroy the countries that host that kind of mass tourism. So as we rebuild the sector, it is vitally important that we do that. One of the critical components of that is ensuring that we price what we value. And that includes things like, you know, dock concessions and entry and so on. Now, those are taonga to New Zealanders, but for people who are travelling across the ocean to get here, we should absolutely price those things, and that's why the International Visitor Levy was an important part of that strategy. It's why I back the notion of a regional levy. It's why I back on particular sites the idea of timed and ticketed entry, which in other places around the world is how you pay for those things to be protected and restored.
I think I know David's answer, but does anyone here on the stage think we need a ministry for tourism?
A ministry.
A
Well,
ministry.
It's actually inside the MB bit that these guys want to cut, so it's already in there. I think the structure we have now is good. Tourism New Zealand actually out there in market does a really good job for New Zealand.
Okay. We've only got a few minutes
What
left.
did you think my answer was?
I didn't think you were going to be terribly supportive of too many new ministries.
Well, Jack,
Am I inaccurate?
there's a reason you get paid the big bucks. Jack.
There's a broader question there, which is about the shape of the public service. And at the moment, we do have these kind of mega ministries in which I think, frankly, a lot of accountability gets lost. And it is very hard for ministers to have clear line of sight through. And I do prefer kind of smaller, more focused ministries with a single mission and a clear line of accountability.
A ministry for tourism?
Well, you know, I think that actually, yes, you could take tourism out of MB and set it up as a distinct agency, and that way it would be a whole lot easier for people to interact with and know where to know
Okay,
to look.
we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I think we'll finish up, guys, with each of you painting us a bit of a picture here this evening. 30 seconds or a minute or so of how New Zealand will be better if we are having this debate in 3 years' time as a result of you being part of the next government or indeed the finance minister. James, we'll start with you.
Look, if you think that everybody in this country deserves to be able to have a warm, dry, affordable and accessible home, if you think that everybody should be able to have enough to live on and to be able to make ends meet, if you think that we should be able to look after our precious places and our wildlife and our wildernesses, then at this election we are asking you to give your party vote to the Green Party.
Nicola.
National wants to reduce the cost of living, lift incomes and back growth. That means backing businesses and seeing them succeed. With a national government, you will see more disciplined spending and the books in better order. You will see less tax for working people and fewer taxes across the board. You will see less regulation and red tape making your life difficult. You will see more of a focus on the basics in our schools and filling the workforce shortages that need to be filled. And you will see infrastructure that gets built, not just talked about, and will fix a few potholes too.
At the end of the next electoral cycle, we're going to see an economy that's growing again at about 3%. We're going to see a large number of New Zealanders working in new industries, in the game development sector, in the renewable energy sector, jobs that are high wage, that are low emissions and give economic security. And if I'm part of the next government, we're also going to continue on the journey to make sure that New Zealand's a genuinely fair and equitable place. That means a government that works in partnership with its communities and that continues the progress on reducing inequality. If you vote for Labour, we'll continue a balanced approach that makes progress and gives New Zealanders a shot at achieving their potential.
And David.
After 3 years of ex-influence, we will have recognised that what we see today as a cost of living crisis is really a long, slow slip in productivity, in fact a productivity crisis. We will have improved the quality of our government spend by setting clear goals and KPIs for each department, contracting the chief executive and rewarding them for performance instead of saying, here's some money, go do good stuff. We will have been relentless on the quality of regulation so that people spend more time being productive and less time attempting to be compliant while in fear. And we will have widened the range of ways that we fund and finance infrastructure so that stuff gets built faster and the support is there for private investment and economic growth. In short, we will be an economy that is relentlessly focused on productivity in order that we can solve so many of the problems that New Zealanders face, whether it's climate change, changing geopolitics, or an ageing population. It will all be easier to solve if we have that relentless focus on productivity based on quality spending, quality regulation, and more advanced investment in infrastructure. Thank you very much for tonight.
All right. A couple of quick final thank yous. Thanks to ASB and the Queenstown Business Chamber of Commerce for making this evening possible. Thanks to the wonderful Sofitel Hotel for hosting me. I felt like a fucking baller in the last few days, to be honest. Yeah. Thank you all for coming out here and for valuing this event and this debate. The polling day itself is a month from now. Early voting opens October 2nd. And finally, won't you join me in thanking David Seymour, Grant Robertson, Nicola Willis and James Shaw. Enjoy the evening and vote.